You hate government, one of them libertarian types, or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quotes, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. All right, you guys. I'm Scott Horton. This is the Scott Horton Show. All right. Hey, we got the great Patrick Cockburn on the phone. He is Middle East correspondent for The Independent. That's independent.co.uk. He's the best Western reporter in the Middle East, is what he is. He's the author of the book Muqtada al-Sadr, The Shia Revival and the Future of Iraq, and a brand new one coming out at the end of the month about the rise of the Islamic State. Oh yeah, good. Wrong button. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Patrick?
Not so bad, thanks.
Good. Appreciate you coming back on the show. And very important story that you have here in The Independent. Iraq crisis, how Saudi Arabia helped ISIS take over the north of the country. And I think you're not just referring to, as we've known all along for 3 or 4 years now, 3 years, that the Saudis have been helping to finance the revolution in Syria, but I think you're going further. Please explain.
Well, it's the basis of the story is really that ISIS didn't really do this alone. It did this with other military organizations within the Sunni community, and these organizations are generally financed by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. The piece is really based on a very interesting speech made by somebody called Sir Richard Dearlove, who was head of British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, the British equivalent of the CIA, I'm told 10 years ago. And he was quoting Prince Bandar bin Sultan, who was the very powerful Saudi ambassador in Washington for 24 years, and then head of Saudi intelligence, and the guy who was most involved in supporting the jihadi movements against Assad and probably similar movements within Iraq. And he said, Dearlove quoted him as saying, the time is not far off in the Middle East, Richard, when it will be literally God help the Shia. More than 1 billion Sunnis have simply had enough of them. And the implication that Dearlove drew from this was that at the heart of Saudi policy is anti-Shiism, which I'd agree with. I mean, I think rather like anti-Semitism was at the heart of fascist ideology in Europe in the 20s and 30s. So basically the Saudis can't avoid getting involved in militancy against Shiadom, according to Dearlove, which hence their present involvement in Iraq.
When was this conversation between Bandar and Dearlove that we're talking about here?
Oh, it was quite some time ago, but he drew the interpretation that he drew the conclusion that at the heart of Saudi policy is a sort of a sympathy for any anti-Shia jihadis.
Mm-hmm.
And hence, he says, look, it's just impossible that ISIS could have started this great revolt in northern Syria without the participation of outside powers, notably Saudi Arabia, which I think is probably a pretty fair summary of what happened.
Well, now, as we've talked about over the years, the CIA has certainly helped to coordinate the support, but, you know, their spin, Patrick, has always been that, well, look, they're arming and financing, well, and they deny the arming from time to time and admit to it at other times, but certainly the money and the aid that, as they call it, that goes, they say, well, it just goes to the Free Syrian Army, the moderates, the carefully vetted moderates, not ISIS. But is it that's just the Americans are not directly arming ISIS, but the Saudis are? Or how exactly does it break down?
Well, I think that they were. I think, unfortunately, that ISIS doesn't need any more arms. This has just taken Mosul. This was at one time 60,000 Iraqi troops were meant to be there. So probably their weapons, their tanks, their artillery are all in ISIS hands. So they don't need arms directly from the Saudis or anybody else at the moment.
Yeah. But over the last few years, though, are you saying that the U.S. and Saudi have been directly arming ISIS this whole time?
Well, I think indirectly that, there was always this pretense that there was something as a moderate Saudi opposition, and that, aid was going to them. But, the U.S., they were not directly doing this, but they were well aware that the Saudis and the Qataris were doing this. And they were doing this under sort of U.S. guidance. Mm-hmm. And there was sort of a pretense that it wasn't going to the sort of al-Qaeda types, but it obviously was. So we ended up, we have an opposition, a Syrian military opposition now, which is wholly dominated by jihadis and increasingly dominated by ISIS. That the only players that are going to be left are the Syrian government and ISIS. So the U.S. will then, and the Europeans and the others will have to make a choice. Are they going to remain against Assad, in which case they'll be de facto allying themselves with ISIS, or they're going to give up this pretense that there is a sort of Syrian moderate opposition left. On Monday, there's a big provincial capital in eastern Syria called Deir ez-Zor, and big province, oil-rich province, and 98% of that is now in the hands of ISIS.
All right, now I'm sorry, we got to stop right there. That's a great point to hold it. We got to take this break. We'll be right back, everybody, with Patrick Cockburn from theindependent.co.uk. Hey, all, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm on the line with the great Patrick Cockburn from The Independent. And we're talking about Iraq, of course, ISIS, and the Saudi role, the American and Saudi role in supporting the war in Syria, the war against Assad, which Patrick has been warning in print and on this show for the last few years is re-energizing the Sunni insurgency in Iraq and threatening to, tear what was left of that society into pieces, which is happening now. And so now to the degree that this is all deliberate, I guess the question really comes down to the question of control. Where's Bandar get all of these guys, Patrick, and what's his relationship with Baghdad? Is he directing their policy or advising them, or he's just hoping for the worst?
I think it's more that at crucial moments they facilitate them. I think it was private money that was going there, but they don't need it anymore. I think that they were sort of facilitating them, or almost sort of directly in charge, sort of last year and the year before, doling out money to armed groups in Syria. Now I think Bandar's been sacked, maybe because of that, and because the Saudis government has sort of realized that they've produced this Frankenstein monster that they don't really control anymore in the shape of ISIS, and doesn't need them so much because its victories means that it can get all the recruits it wants. It controls lots of oil wells, so it doesn't need so much money. And it doesn't need weapons, but it's just captured them from the Iraqi army, which got them from the Americans. So, but I think that they did play a crucial role. And, the Saudis also, through their influence in Turkey kept that border open, 500-mile border into Syria. And how did all these jihadis get to Iraq, and how did they get to Syria? They came across the Turkish border. They flew into Ankara.
Well, do you think, though, that it was Bandar's plan that they would end up moving back to the east into Iraq and sack Mosul and mount this challenge to Maliki?
Always hated the idea that Baghdad had fallen to a Shia government. They wouldn't talk to the Iraqi prime minister. So, I think they did play a big role in that. I don't think they're hands-on in control of ISIS now, but I think they played an absolutely crucial role in the development of ISIS, one that they may be regretting now, but it's too late.
Well, so let's go back then to 2004 through 2008 or 9, when the fight was America and the Shia militias and the, AKA the Iraqi army versus the Sunni-based insurgency. Was the Sunni-based insurgency and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Zarqawi's group, financed by the Saudis then?
Well, they always got money, from private donors. I think the government was too smart to give it direct. But, there are lots of other ways of doing this. By turning a blind eye to where money goes. All the U.S. government reports after 9/11 said, that's where the money is coming from for these groups, is coming from private donations. But it's sort of, the government the Saudi government, the Kuwaiti government, the other Sunni monarchies can just not try very hard to stop that money going. And that's the money I think was crucial at one time. I don't think it is so crucial now because ISIS has taken over. It's declared the caliphate. It rules this enormous area. With natural resources, with the population it can tax. It can sort of live off plunder as well. It's what it's taking from the banks and elsewhere. So I think the Saudi role was crucial. It was sort of disastrous, I think, for themselves, and I think disastrous for the Sunni community because, sure, in Iraq and in Syria they had a lot to complain of, that they were marginalized, they were denied jobs, that young men were arrested and tortured and so forth. They were thoroughly alienated, but now they've sort of chosen as their vanguard party a wholly bloodthirsty, bigoted, sectarian group that has sort of declared war on the Shia and everybody else who doesn't hold exactly similar religious views to themselves, and they're isolated internationally. This is also an area, which is held by ISIS militarily, but is going to be impoverished. But people, no salaries will be paid, the schools and universities will be shut, there'll be lack of electricity, lack of water. So it's going to be a pretty dismal scene for them. So I think the Saudis, in thinking, and Prince Bandar, in imagining that they were striking back against the Shia, have actually doomed the Sunni communities in Iraq and Syria to a terrible future.
Well, but like you were saying right before the break there, they have seized more territory in Syria, including some oil wells. It's just not going to be enough, you think?
It's not enough, no, not to keep a whole communities going. We're talking about millions of people here. It's kind of convenient for a bit that they've got money, and they've got money to pay their fighters. They've got, you can also buy off various tribes by allocating, so many 4,000 barrels a day to this tribe, 2,000 barrels a day to another one. You can do that, but that doesn't sort of keep a whole area going. It's sort of cut off. Trade can't. It used to be Erbil, which is the Kurdish capital, is about 200 miles north of Baghdad. Now, I was talking to somebody in the trucking business, was telling me, 6 weeks ago, you wanted to truck from Erbil to Baghdad to carry a load. It cost you about $500. Now it costs you $10,000, so all the trade routes are disrupted and cut.
Right. Well, and that's going to affect everybody all around. Now, so what about Aleppo? I was talking with Mitchell Prothero from McClatchy, and he was saying how, ISIS must see that really any kind of full frontal assault on Baghdad is a fool's errand. It's too late for that, but maybe they'll move back toward Aleppo, which is lower hanging fruit and maybe more important to them.
What's happening in Aleppo is that the government, the Assad forces, are sort of moving against weakening rebels who are not ISIS. Rebels are being sort of squeezed out of existence. The military opposition, including Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate, is being squeezed out of existence between the government and ISIS. Now, ISIS is moving, taking over the whole of the east. It might come back into Aleppo city and might confront the government and try and take Aleppo. It's certainly a feasible strategy. As regards Baghdad, I don't think they can take Baghdad, but they can do a lot of nasty things to Baghdad. They can sort of cut the roads around Baghdad. They can take over some of the Sunni enclaves. And one of the sort of the bad news out of Iraq is that the government, it's now over a month since the fall of Mosul. It hasn't been able to put together a counterattack. It's trying to attack Tikrit today, I think. I don't know if it's getting anywhere. But, it hasn't been able to respond to that great defeat. But things still seem to be spiraling downwards. So, yeah, I'd agree that they're not going to be able to storm and capture Baghdad, but they can certainly make life very unpleasant there.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems like most of the fighting between Sunni and Shia since 2003 here, and by most, I mean 99%. It seems like it's all just been about who's who and a faction fight over, Badr here versus AQI there and these tribal differences and this and that kind of thing. And yet more and more after all these years of fighting, it seems like it's becoming sectarian sort of for its own sake, and now accusations of blasphemy and this kind of thing are coming to the forefront. And the way you describe ISIS, they sound like Nazis with this pathological hatred of Shia, that they just mean to exterminate every last one of them if they can. Is that really right?
Yeah, it can't really be done, but they can kill a lot of people along the way,
But they would like to, is your point. They're really that hell-bent about it.
These sort of extreme jihadis, what one Afghan journalist called holy fascists, and it's a quite useful descriptive phrase. They are like fascists. I mean, they're obsessed with violence. They're obsessed with enemies who can be only opposed by violence. They're obsessed with the idea of being holders of the true faith. But in the long term, I think their prospects are not great. But in the short term, and you just look since beginning of June, they've taken over northern Iraq. Now they've taken over a great chunk of eastern Syria. While people are sort of focusing on what's happening in Gaza, they've been able to do this. So they're a movement also that depend on success. What attracts a lot of Sunni young men to their ranks is they're joining a victorious army. Victorious armies don't have too much problem with recruitment.
Right, it does seem like the Islamic Front and the Nusra groups, the various factions in Syria, are quite quickly, signing up, switching sides over to ISIS.
Yeah, I mean, it's what else are they going to do? They can't really fight these guys because their morale is high, their numbers are up, and they've got all this equipment taken from the Iraqi army. They've got tanks, they've got artillery, they've got rockets. They got Humvees, they're all driving around in Humvees, So, if you're another Syrian opposition, you can either, join them or die or run. And they're doing all three, but they're not able to oppose them.
Mm-hmm. What's been the general reaction around the region from the religious leaders and all the scholars? Because after all, Baghdadi is saying, you all must swear loyalty to me, that kind of thing. So that must have provoked a kind of counter-reaction,
well, it's pretty negative, but what's the legitimacy of the people who are condemning him, Again, the fact he's victorious and they're not, and all these sort of religious authorities in these different countries, what's their legitimacy? What's their credibility? What have they done, I think he's a very nasty piece of work. I think these, as I say, are sort of very dangerous fascists. But they can say, well, we declared our caliphate, and it's getting bigger by the day. We're winning. And, so it doesn't much matter. Some preacher in Cairo says he doesn't like them, But what have those guys ever done? So it's very appealing, I think, for a lot of Sunni young men throughout the region.
Yeah,
and also people who are just, the legitimacy of governments throughout the region is not high, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Jordan or elsewhere, or Egypt. So these guys will have a lot of attraction to people there.
Yeah, it seems like, especially if these imams criticizing the Islamic State can be accused of basically serving whatever emir or sultan or king or so-called president that they're living under in whatever country, seems like that'll help discredit everything else they stand for, too, in the face of condemning ISIS from such a position.
Yeah. That maybe the majority will be against them, but they'll attract a core of true believers.
Numbers.
And these guys are very well organized, and they haven't really put a foot wrong since they attacked in Mosul militarily. I mean, otherwise, slaughtering people, it's terrible, but militarily they haven't made too many mistakes. They've attacked where people haven't expected them to attack.
Do you have any idea what their strategy is in the near or medium future for Jordan?
I don't think they'll do. They seem to think one enemy at a time. What's noticeable in Baghdad was very little violence because they obviously didn't want to dissipate their forces. They, as regards the Kurds, they have a 600-mile common frontier with the Kurds at the moment. There is fighting in a few areas, but generally they don't want a confrontation with the Kurds at this moment, and it's not happening. So, it's kind of impressive sort of command and control.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've already kept you a bit over here, but I sure appreciate you coming back on the show, Patrick.
I do.
Bye-bye. All right, y'all. That's Patrick Cockburn at the Independent, independent.co.uk. How Saudi Arabia helped ISIS take over the north of the country. Hey, y'all. Scott here. Ever wanted to help support the show and own silver at the same time? Well, a friend of mine, libertarian activist Arlo Pignatti, has invented the alternative currency with the most promise of them all. QR Silver Commodity Discs. The first ever QR code 1-ounce silver pieces. Just scan the back of one with your phone and get the instant spot price. They're perfect for saving or spending at the market. And anyone who donates $100 or more to the Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate gets one. That's scotthorton.org/donate. And if you'd like to learn and order more, send them a message at commoditydiscs.com or check them out on Facebook at /commoditydiscs. And thanks. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. Oh, John Kerry's Mideast peace talks have gone nowhere. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com.